by its original commander, John Bell Hood, and that even though Hood had not commanded it for a long time, was still commonly known as Hood's Texas Brigade, the 1st, 4th, and 5th Texas Infantry, with a few Arkansans thrown in for seasoning. This unit had earned its fame in the Eastern Theater, and as part of Longstreet's command, it is sent down here to reinforce Bragg's army for what turns out to be the Battle of Chickamauga. And in fact, the Texas Brigade will be the first of Longstreet's troops to complete the 970-mile railroad trip from Virginia. They will arrive first over at Resaca, Georgia, which at that particular day and time, the 15th of September, was Braxton Bragg's railhead. But as Bragg then pushes his railhead up to Catoosa Platform, they will move north there, and they will then participate in the opening movements on September the 18th that bring on the Battle of Chickamauga. What we're going to do is leave here in just a moment. We're going to walk down Viniard-Alexander Road just a little bit further and put Robertson's brigade on the battlefield on the evening of September the 18th. And then we're going to walk up a trail to the area where they deploy on the morning of September the 19th, and then move westward, and then come back into the Vineyard Farm area from the north, similar to the way that Robertson's brigade will move in the action on the afternoon of September the 19th. It'll be about a 2-mile round-trip walk and about a 2-hour time frame. I'll just have to talk a little faster now. So, we'll make basically a big square here, and for the majority of you all, as I said, I'll just reformat it slightly so that we end up there where the majority of you all are parked. So, we're going to start out walking on the paved road here. Please be careful of any traffic that may approach. And then we will turn off onto a trail. The trail surface is going to be uneven to a degree, so please be careful of your footing on the trails as we go. And we won't be doing much walking in the grass, but footing will be our big issue. It is warm. I hope everybody is hydrated. We'll mostly be in the shade. And be cognizant that some of the insects of this time of the year are still out. So, Mr. Grant, since you're a volunteer, I'll also get you to sign that I did a safety briefing. Thank you, sir. As the head of Longstreet's detachment coming from Virginia and being moved from Resaca up to the Catoosa Station or Catoosa Platform area. Robertson's brigade will be assigned on September the 18th by Braxton Bragg to the command of Bushrod Johnson. Johnson's brigade had been moving southward along the East Tennessee and Georgia rail line, and then he was on the Western Atlantic rail line. He essentially, as Bragg retreated south into Georgia on September the 9th, 10th, and 11th, Bushrod Johnson's brigade became the brigade of infantry along the railroad as Bragg receded south down into Georgia. And when Bragg, beginning with decisions made on September the 15th and 16th, decided to take the offensive against Rosecrans' army, and with the arrival of, in addition to Robertson's brigade, over on the Western Atlantic Railroad, but also the brigade of John Bragg and Evander McNair, two brigades that have been sent from Mississippi. There now is, and with the anticipated arrival of additional troops from Longstreet's command, there is now over on the Western Atlantic Railroad in the area of Catoosa Station or Catoosa Platform a growing force. And eventually by the morning of September the 18th, there were actually 6 brigades over there. Bushrod Johnson's own brigade, John Gregg's brigade, McNair's brigade, Robertson's brigade, and then also Benning's Georgia Brigade and Evander Law's Alabama Brigade have arrived. However, Benning and Benning and Law have just arrived and are in need of cooking rations. And when Bragg made a modification to his plan on the morning of the 18th in his effort to get in between the Union Army and Chattanooga, he will order Bushrod Johnson to take command of those brigades at the end of the railroad, and Bragg forms a provisional division. And Johnson, a Bragg friend, is given command of tacitly 5 of those 6 brigades. But Benning's Georgia Brigade was still in the latter stages of cooking rations. And so when Johnson marched from Ringgold on the morning of September the 18th, he has directly in his column his own brigade now under Fulton, Gregg's brigade, McNair's brigade, and the 4th brigade in the column is the Texas Brigade under Jerome Robertson. They will march westward on the Reed's Bridge Road and become engaged with Minty in the fight for control of the crossing at Reed's Bridge. When Minty's resistance at Peavine Creek forced Johnson to deploy his troops, Johnson will deploy his brigade in the center, McNair's brigade to his right, Gregg to his left, and Robertson's brigade is deployed behind McNair on the right as a reserve and a force to protect that right flank. And they will advance on Reed's Bridge, with Fulton's brigade doing most of the work of driving Minty's force back across the creek at Reed's Bridge. As the Texans move forward, they will suddenly see a very familiar face. Their old brigade commander, John Bell Hood. His recovering left arm, injured in the fighting at Gettysburg 11 weeks before, John Bell Hood suddenly appears in the column. Hood, who had been in Richmond recuperating from that Gettysburg wound, as Longstreet's troops began to pass through the city, particularly the lead brigade, his old brigade, he went down to the rail station to see them. He was cheered by these men that he had once commanded, and they, perhaps jokingly, but perhaps seriously, encouraged him to come along with them. And even though his left arm is still only partly usable and is still being worn in a sling, John Bell Hood, who could not resist the temptation, largely because he felt he needed something more glorious, so as to hopefully seal the deal that he was hoping to consummate in Richmond at that time. Because while he was recuperating in Richmond, he was pursuing another goal. The belle of the Confederacy, Buck Preston, and Hood will leave Richmond to join his command in the field, thinking that Buck has agreed to marry him. But he thinks one more glorious day on a battlefield, and that will seal the deal with Buck Preston. But Hood had ridden south, and eventually on the 18th will catch up with his old brigade. It had taken him a day or so to get out of Richmond, and so he was further along in the column of troops on the train. But on the 18th, he actually will ride. He arrived at Catoosa Platform Once his horses unloaded, he will ride forward, and he'll be gloriously cheered by his soldiers as they advance at Reed's Bridge. As Johnson's troops push the Minty across the creek at Reed's Bridge, and Minty then will withdraw, Hood makes the decision to, since he is senior, he's a major general, Johnson's only a brigadier general, Hood makes the decision to march south from the Reed's Bridge, Jay's Mill area by what he was told was the most direct route towards Lee and Gordon's Mill. And that brings him down the Jay's Mill Road, along the Alexander Vineyard Road, going in this direction. Now this intersection was not quite the way it is today. There actually was a farm lane that angled off to the southwest more directly towards Lee and Gordon's Mill, and that is what they are oriented on. But when Bragg's brigade, which at that time is in the lead, when it gets into this area, it makes contact right at dark with a federal force, John Thomas Wilder's brigade of mounted infantry. And any further forward Confederate advance that day is halted. And Bushrod Johnson will deploy his own brigade, Fulton, McNair's and Gregg's brigade. He'll deploy them across the front here, facing off to the southwest towards the Federals and Lee and Gordon's Mill. And his 4th immediately available brigade, Robertson's Texas Brigade, will be deployed on the south side of the road, facing south, towards Dalton's and Thedford's Ford, where additional Confederate troops were supposed to cross, and where those Confederates of Buckner's Corps, Preston's and Stewart's divisions, they had come up and seized those fords, but had not exploited those crossings. Robertson's brigade is deployed facing down towards them, probably for fear that there might be some federal force that might try to come in that way. Johnson and Hood are unaware of what's going on down there with Buckner. And so Robertson's men will spend the night bivouacked here on the south side of the Alexander Vineyard Road, facing down towards Dalton's and Thedford's Ford. The next morning, with Bragg's arrival on the battlefield and Buckner finally moving his troops across Dalton and Thedford's Ford, the Confederates begin to make dispositions for the action of that day. Bragg still believed that the Union left flank would be at Lee and Gordon's Mill, and he could simply resume the movement of the day before. But if you do something to your enemy, you better figure your enemy's going to do what? Something in return. Braxton Bragg did not anticipate that. Braxton Bragg should have anticipated that if it has taken him longer to get across the creek than he had originally intended, the Federals would probably react by trying to shift troops further to the north. And of course, that's what happens. Thomas's men march across the rear of the army. But up to 7:30, even later, even in some ways all the way to midday, Braxton Bragg still believed that he could simply resume the movement of the day before and strike the Union left flank, which would be still down at Lee and Gordon's Mill. Now, as Bragg and Hood and Johnson and Buckner meet one another and ride around and begin to make their dispositions, additional troops from Hood's division of Longstreet's Corps arrive. That is Benning's Georgia Brigade and Evander Law's Alabama Brigade. They've now completed their ration cooking. They had, on the evening of the 18th, marched westward to the area of Reed's Bridge and had bivouacked just on the east side of West Chickamauga Creek in the area of Reed's Bridge. Some of you all who were with me this morning for Dan McCook in the morning, it is some of these men that the 69th Ohio makes contact with when they go out to try to burn Reed's Bridge. They now have crossed the creek, and they are marching to join Robertson's brigade and John Bell Hood. By this time also, William Henry Talbot Shot Pouch Walker has got his troops across the creek at Byram's or Lambert's Ford, and he marches them this way on Alexander Vineyard Road as part of Bragg's concentration for this assault down towards Lee and Gordon's Mill. In fact, as Walthall's and Govan's Mississippi and Arkansas, respectively, brigades rested by the side of the road, the Bennings, Georgians, and Laws, Alabamans marched past them. And many of the men of Walthall's and Govan's brigade will make note of the arrival of these Virginia reinforcements. But now, with the arrival of two more of Hood's brigades, and Hood in command now of that portion of his brigade, that portion of his division, 3 brigades that has arrived, and Bushrod Johnson's provisional division now reduced to just 3 brigades. Hood, as an acting corps commander, will order those 3 brigades of his division to deploy on the right of Bushrod Johnson. And so Robertson's men, who had bivouacked south of the road here, will, early that morning of September the 19th, now march off to the north, along with Bennings, Georgians, and Laws, Alabamans, to form up on Johnson's right for this expected attack towards Lee and Gordon's Mill. With the arrival of Law and Bennings' brigade, and Hood now wanting to act as a corps commander, the command of Hood's division will fall to Evander Law, and Law will move up to division level command. And so now the division will deploy for what turns out to be their action on September the 19th. So. Also, along the road here, behind Johnson's line and behind Robertson's line, were the ordnance wagons and the ambulances of Johnson's provisional division. They were bivouacked along the roads. Questions or observations here, Paul?
When was McNair arrive on the battlefield?
Well, he's with Bushrod Johnson, and they march from Ringgold on the 18th. They're involved in the action at Reed's Bridge, so they've been here all on the 18th, along with Bushrod Johnson. So. Okay, all righty. Reproduction method and a photographic reproduction method. So they can more quickly produce a new edition of a map with updated information.
The Confederates didn't have that kind of technology
Nope.
then?
They had a lithographic, there were lithography companies in like Columbia, South Carolina, and Richmond, Virginia, and other places. But the lithographic reproduction technique, capability that the Army of the Cumberland had with it had been made mobile. Rosecrans thinks so much of the need for maps that the transportation assets have been allocated to the Topographic Engineers Department, sufficient for them to move their lithographic press. Now, the lithogram, I don't want to get too far off of the subject here, but lithographic press requires these flat pieces of stone onto which the map is etched. And then you ink it and you put the paper against it and press it. Well, when we're talking about moving this, we're talking about moving the great big giant press and all of these sheets of stone.
Nice.
One sheet of stone for each color to be on each map. And some of the maps they're doing are in color. I don't know how many wagons or rail cars this thing took, but they move it from, in August, they move it from Murfreesboro to Stevenson, Alabama, and set it up again. And then later, after the siege, they move it into Chattanooga and set it up.
It remained there, I guess.
I'm sorry?
It remained there in Chattanooga.
As far as I know, it remained in Chattanooga the rest of the war. They felt it was important enough to have the capability to do that. The photographic technique, they would use photographic chemicals, sensitize a piece of paper, sandwich it with a master map on vellum, expose it to the daylight for just a brief time, and then wash it, fix it, and it produced a brown map with the features in white on it. But it embrittled the paper. It wasn't a very good process. It was even called the quick map process. But they could produce a new edition of a map even more quickly with that process. But the lithographic process allowed them to produce better maps. They could be in color and on better paper. So I pause here for just a moment, because as we walk northward, I don't know the exact alignment that Robertson's brigade marched, but we're moving along the crest of this low rise. Notice how the ground drops off on both sides. Remember, as we were walking on Alexander Vineyard Road, I said, notice how the ground is rising in front of you? That's this crest that we're on now. But notice how it drops off right over there. This crest kind of runs north and south, and Johnson's division is deploying along it in the area where we are now and southward, and then Law's division is going to deploy on the crest, with Robertson's brigade on the left front and Law's brigade on the right front and Benning behind. So we're now literally walking into the area where Hood's going to be deploying his own division under Evander Law. Behind what?
One brigade.
No, one division.
One division.
Johnson's division. And we've now walked into Robertson's brigade, which is the left front brigade of Law's division. What's up there? Law's own Alabama brigade. And then back behind is Benning. And since Rebel, you've now given me a hard time about how far we walked. We're now going to walk up to the Law tablet and back to the Benning tablet.
Okay.
The scale of this battlefield is, when you get out here on the ground like we are, is very large. Now you also hopefully noticed that we were coming downhill just a little bit. That ridge line that Johnson was on is kind of dying out. Now right here, we're probably more towards the right of Robertson's brigade, so much of it was down here. They're about 1,200 strong, so deployed down here for maybe 300 yards. And then Law's Alabama brigade is up there, and Benning's Georgia brigade is back behind. Let me get your question.
Practical question occurred to me. We're all attired here probably in fairly decent arch-supported material. I think I know some, but what would it have been likely?
The shoes that they were wearing, think about your fancy dress shoes, the leather-soled, leather upper dress shoes. Not much support in them at all. After they get worn a little bit and wet a little bit, they're going to become pretty form-fitting to your feet. The leather is going to deform a little bit and actually take the shape of your foot. Most shoes up to the time of the Civil War were still only being made straight-lasted. How did you get left and right shoes? By wearing them. Yep. Yep. They took left and right shape by actually being worn. Now remember, most of these guys are farmers. They spend most of their time on their feet. They're 18 to 25 years of age by and large, but they've got tough feet. They've got tougher feet. And they're, this is going to take a toll on them. But even without military service, even without Civil War service, life was hard. You worked hard. Life expectancy was not as great, although that sometimes when you see the figures about life expectancy, they're actually you've got to ask the question when you see those figures. You got to ask, how were they created? Are they factoring in infant and childhood mortality? And even with the life expectancy figures that we hear about today for the United States, we need to ask the question, are you factoring in infant and childhood mortality? Because if you are, then that's going to bring that upper age down some. Yes, life expectancy was not as great then as it is today, and in large measure simply because people just wore out. All of the physical exertion that they did. So. And you can read the pension files of these guys north and south, and rheumatism and arthritis and feet and leg problems are very common. So, and not just from their military service from 25 or 30 years earlier, but also just from all the collective aspect of their life. So, I do have a set of living history equipment, and I've got my Union reproduction Jefferson Brogans are some of the better quality reproduction ones, and they're not comfortable to wear. And on the rare occasion I do a program in them, the last thing I put on is the shoes, and I typically do that at the cab of my truck after everything else is ready to go away from the truck, and I take my boots off and set them down on the floorboard underneath the steering wheel on the driver's side, and when I get back to the truck, the first thing that comes off is my living history shoes, and my boots go right back on. So, later on, catch up with the 23rd Tennessee guys and see how some of them are doing. So, but yeah, it was tough, and you've walked on some of the rocks here. Now, of course, there's a little more exposure. They would have been going down more through something like that. So. So Robertson's brigade has come up here and deployed. The left of the brigade is the Arkansans, under Colonel Van Manning, and then the 1st, 4th, and 5th Texas on to the right. They deploy along the crest of the rise here. With Law's Alabama Brigade deployed off to the north, and they will be in position here before the opening engagement occurs up at the area of Jay's Mill. This is a very early morning deployment for them. Because, as I said, it is all part of Bragg's hope of simply resuming the assault down towards Lee and Gordon's Mill. But that order will never come, and they will listen to the sound of battle roar towards them. And as Robertson says, after having remained in line of battle from daybreak until nearly 3 p.m., I was ordered to into position, into the final position on this exact alignment, and then on receiving the order to advance, attack the enemy, I was directed to keep closed on Law's brigade. Hood had listened to the sound of battle roar southward during the course of the day, and with never receiving the order to launch the attack against Lee and Gordon's Mill, he grows anxious. And when fighting erupts further to the north here, between Van Cleve's division and Stewart's division, Hood decides he's going to join the fight. And Bushrod Johnson's division will begin to advance. And because at that moment the sound of fighting was to the north, Johnson's men begin to angle across the front, as it turns out, of Law's division here. They're going to go off to the northwest and actually engage Jefferson Columbus Davis's division in the woods to the east of the Vineyard Field. But drive Davis back, and Johnson is going to pass on off to the northwest, cross the LaFayette Road, north of Vineyard Field, and in the area between the Vineyard Field and the Brotherton Field. And finally, Hood gives Law the command to advance. And that will come at about 3:30. Colonel Van Manning of the 3rd Arkansas says, at 3:30 in the evening of the 19th, I was ordered to move my regiment, formed in line of battle on the left of the brigade, to the front. With skirmishers thrown out, in the case of the 1st Texas, it's Company I, the 4 regiments of the brigade will move forward. Now, as they start to move forward, Johnson is still engaging Federals out in front of them, actually a little bit off to the left. And so, in the wooded environment, what's the principal thing they have to guide on? The sound of the guns. And they actually begin to angle off a little bit to the left. But Law's Alabama Brigade up here, hearing the sound of the fight with Van Cleve and Stewart, when they went forward, guess which way they go? To the right. Yeah, and so Law's formation of 2 brigades up and 1 brigade back all of a sudden breaks down when Law's Alabama Brigade goes off in that direction. And that's going to force Law to bring Benning's Georgians up from the 2nd line and deploy them on Robertson's right flank. Now, as Robertson and Law advance, they're actually going to wheel a little bit to the left, and they're going to go more southwestward in that direction. Unfortunately, that is not a move we can emulate because of the vegetation there. And so what we have to do is they're going to go kind of the hypotenuse of the triangle. We've got to walk the other 2 sides of the right triangle. But we're going to walk in just a minute. We're going to go westward, and then we'll turn and go back southward. They're going to go more just directly due southwest, but we'll still kind of wind up in the same area that.
But why didn't they take the trail?
Well, which one, Rebel? There were lots of trails here.
You never take the trail.
There were more miles of trail here then than there are today. There were little trails that ran pretty much direct between all of the farmsteads. It created a real dense network of paths through the woods, but most of them were nothing more than a trail through the woods.
Well, we've got the trail here, and it goes that way. Why didn't they take it?
Hey, they'd ambush you.
But there was actually a more extensive trail, but of course they're moving in these long lines of battles.
All right, I'll quit harassing you.
So one of the comments of the Confederate commanders is they didn't get artillery support for the attack, but we just passed several batteries of Confederates, or they arrived too late, or they can't see because of the wood cover?
It's more the latter. There are batteries that have been assigned to Law's division since none of Longstreet's artillery has arrived yet. But with the Confederates making the offensive movement, in most cases the artillery could not find a place to fire on the enemy. because of the wooded terrain and the fact that the Confederates were the ones who were making the forward movement. And the Confederate commander's complaint about lack of artillery support is not incorrect, but it doesn't factor in the terrain in which they are operating. And on the rare occasion that the Federals are on the offensive, they have the same lack of artillery support as well, because the forested environment limits the visibility and the firing range of the artillery so greatly. So the artillery really only is effective here where it can fire on the defensive.
You have to know if Company A, 4th Texas, might have been here?
They should have been.
Should have been?
I do not know that any of the companies of the 4th Texas were not here. That's not something that I note here as that they were away. So so theoretically they should be here. So and theoretically they're going to be on the right flank of the regiment. And the regimental commander does not say which company he deployed as skirmishers. Somebody else had a question. Okay. All right, so we're now going to begin the advance. Remember, they're going to go off to our left front. We've got to go westward and then turn south. Moment, because we've now progressed westward and turned south. Again, remember that Robertson's brigade is moving off. They progressively will wheel to the west and move southwestward. And so now, as we go south, we are going to be going down, and pretty soon, as their left comes towards us, we're going to join it, and we'll essentially join the advance southward of the left of Robertson's brigade. Contact. The order is given. We immediately charge them, killing a colonel, pressing him back about 600 yards, driving them to a field which was a few hundred yards in advance, driving them from their position. They're now pushing the Federals back. They've come in on the flank of Haig's brigade of Davis's division, and also part of the flank of that part of Harker's brigade. And they will push the Federals back onto the edge of the wood, bordering the road to Chattanooga, the LaFayette Road. And there we encountered the enemy in force and delivered one volley, and they fell back across the road. The regiment advanced to the road, name not known. The regiment pressed them and urged them into the field, across which they fled. And look off across the Lafayette Road. Look at the big field. All of this big field area here. Now, we are approaching the Vineyard Fields now. Some of you know that just across the road in the low ground is the shell pyramid for Haig, where Hans Christian Haig is mortally wounded. The Vineyard Farmstead buildings are just down here on the other side of the road. And then you can see the monuments in the big Vineyard Field. Imagine the thought of these Confederates now. Robertson's men here in the area where we are and to our left, and here's one of their markers to Benning's Georgia Brigade. The Georgians have now come up on the right, and they're driving the Federals off in that direction. The regiment pressed them and urged them into the field, across which they fled. Well, let's see if we can urge them into the field a little bit as well.
Maybe I was reading about something else, but I thought I read somewhere that Longstreet's uniforms were supplied to him in North Carolina as he passed through.
No, that is in a number of books, and Longstreet's command will eventually get North Carolina provided uniforms, but not until the spring of 1864. That got confused. That's actually in, that misinformation is actually in Glenn Tucker's Chickamauga Bloody Battle in the West.
That might be why I read it, because that's the first book I read.
There's a big issue of clothing to Longstreet's command in August of 1863 on the banks of the Rappahannock River and the Rapidan River in central Virginia. And then there's a next big issue of clothing to Longstreet's command in March of 1864 when they're in Upper East Tennessee. And it's the March 1864 issue, which is the North Carolina stuff.
Oh, okay.
There's, let's see, a fellow by the name, I think, of Peacock was involved in it, some correspondence between Glenn Tucker and a couple of historians, and they conflate the two issues.
Okay.
Now the North Carolina, part of the problem, the reason they're able, it's so easy to do that, is that the stuff in North Carolina was very, very, very similar to what they had gotten from the Richmond Depot in August. In cut and color, there was a lot of similarity, so that confusion got started many years ago. We paused by the site of the Long Schoolhouse, a small community schoolhouse. There are some of the Federals who are being driven back actually took advantage of the schoolhouse itself and probably some other buildings or structures or things associated with the schoolhouse to try to use for shelter to fight. There actually is a little bit of hand-to-hand fighting here right around the log schoolhouse, as Robertson and Benning now drive the Federals back across the LaFayette Road on the other sides.
Is the schoolhouse burned in the battle?
No.
Take a picture of the angle that way.
Vineyard Fields, east of the LaFayette Road. If you remember when we set out from the other parking spot, actually, let me take just a moment. As we're standing here over the next few minutes, keep your ear peeled off in that direction. You might hear another discharge of artillery, but you should definitely hear the whistle of a steam train. Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum's excursion down the old Central Georgia track. I heard it this morning, setting up for the 11 o'clock program, and so we should be able to hear it now as it goes back northward here over the next few minutes. That small field where we eventually set off entirely is through the trees there. You see this stretch of Alexander Viniard Road right here. Just ahead there, it's going to bend to the left and enter the trees. If it went straight, it would come right to that section of the road where we got our group together and began our walk. And so all of the trees basically on this right side of a straight line, if the road went straight, all those trees should disappear, and we should be able to see my truck and Doug's car and Trevor's vehicle. We should be able to see those from here. But what prevents us is trees that have grown up on this wet weather drainage down here.
There's the whistle.
Yep, there's the train. So we would not have heard a train here in 1863. but I do often make note of TVRM's use of that route, because that railroad got built over there before the Battlefield Park was created in 1890. And what brought the monuments here, what brought the veterans here for the 50,000 person dedication of the National Military Park in 1895, what brought the first generation of visitors to this battlefield were steam trains on that railroad line, stopping at the Lytle community that developed over here. So there is a real connection to this, to that rail line and the story of this National Military Park. The outdoor classroom we've been studying in today was first accessed by rail off of that lines. Robertson's brigade now is pushed down literally to the north edge of this field. The 1st Arkansas over there on the brigade left, and then the 1st Texas, and the 4th Texas. Some of the 5th Texas actually gets across the road and moves down in this direction. They actually had a little bit more tree cover that facilitated that movement. But they've now pushed the Federals back out of this field and into the wood line across the field. And over here on the other side of the LaFayette Road, the woods are solid for quite a ways. But there was a thin strip of woods on a wet weather drainage here, and then there was another big field. And Federals take post in that big field. Now, you're amongst those Texans and Arkansans. You've just driven Federals out of those woods. You've taken some casualties. And now, what are you going to have to advance out into? Big field. Do you want to do that? No. Robertson will send staff officers in search of support, and in particular, artillery support. And this is where Robertson's real complaints about a lack of artillery support come in. Here is where the artillery might have had a potential effect to be able to move up to the edge of the woods and maybe soften up the Federals ahead. We can look down the corridor of the Lafayette Road and see the monument to the 8th Kentucky of Barnes's brigade down there. To the left of it would be the guns and monuments to the 3rd Wisconsin Battery. Here's where some artillery might be effective in getting a new forward movement going for Robertson's brigade. But because this is an ad hoc formation essentially, and there's only been some artillery assigned to the division, and it's not a normal relationship, no guns will ever come up. At the same time, while some of the 5th Texas crosses the road and moves south, Benning's Georgians cross the Lafayette Road, move through the thin trees on the other side of the Lafayette Road, and they're moving southwestward in pursuit of Federals who are withdrawing in that direction. Now, of course, many of you all know that there actually is a Federal unit over there which is intact and in place and ready to fight. It's John Thomas Wilder's Brigade of Mounted Infantry in the edge of the woods across the field there. And as finally most of the withdrawing Federals pass off to the southwest, Wilder gives the command to open fire. And all of a sudden, coming from the edge of the woods there, aimed mostly at the Georgians of Benning's brigade, but also at some of the 5th Texas soldiers, and many of those Spencer rounds would have passed across the road and probably impacted amongst the men of the 4th and 1st Texas and 1st Arkansas through here. Here's this huge volume of fire by Wilder's Spencer-wielding troops at the edge of the field. And this is going to be the forward extent of Robertson's advance. One of Robertson's soldiers is a man by the name of Fletcher, member of the 5th Texas, and he will relate We were ordered to charge, and so we plunged forward with a yell, firing as we went. When near, the enemy broke, and with but little effort at returning fire, so things were going fast our way. A short distance to the enemy's rear, where they started the charge, was a high, well-built worm fence, and as I suppose it was the least of their thoughts of having to return that way, or they would have torn it down to clear their rear. At this point, we were crowding them so close that they had no time to push down the fence or climb over it. My position in line with the corner of the fence about 50 yards to the left, and in passing to the front and about 60 yards from the corner stood a house about 10 feet from the fence. That's the Viniard house which stood under the trees on the other side of the road there. And at the opposite end of the house was a dirt chimney. This I would pass near going to the front. The enemy, who were in my front and right, were running over 100 yards off. A great number of the enemy who were running down the fence and turning the corner attracted my attention from my immediate front. Between the house and the fence there was a block that extended nearly back to the corner of the fence. A great majority of them were in a pushing motion and jammed at close range. I got 2 shots and thought, oh, for a shotgun loaded with buckshot. I saw I could not get loaded in time to get a 3rd shot before the jam would be broken. So I struck a long trot and was loading to get a shot just as I would clear the far corner of the house. I was passing the end of the house about 20 feet to my left when something struck my left foot as I had it up and thrown forward. As I came down on it, I fell forward, striking the edge of the hole that was made in removing dirt for the chimney. So in rolling into the hole, I landed on my back, stretched full length. Instantly I saw I was well protected, and from sounds I supposed a piece of flying shell had hit hard enough to trip me. There had been no pain up to this time, so the idea struck me that I was not wounded and had a coward's position, and I was liable to be seen in it. I raised up my head to get up, and as I cast my eyes to my feet, I saw the leather on the left shoe torn near center on the inside. I turned my foot and saw the rent on the outside near the heel. I quickly removed the shoe and found I had a bad foot wound made by a bullet. Fletcher has been wounded, trying to continue the assault on southward through the buildings of the Vineyard farmstead. He goes on to describe hobbling to the rear, hopping along on his right leg, and as he goes seeking shelter, he found a tree, but leaning against the protected side of the tree was a wounded Union soldier. Fletcher is less wounded than that Union soldier, and so with a shove, the Union soldier is pushed from behind that tree, and Fletcher takes shelter from or behind it for a couple of minutes, and then he hobbles on. Eventually he finds, as he says, a layout, a man skulking from the main battle line, who helps him along for a short time, but then that fellow abandons him and he'll hobble on to the rear. But he did, along the way, take the opportunity to acquire a Yankee knapsack, which looked particularly well loaded. And he slung it over his own, and then at an opportune time, just behind the line, he stopped and examined the contents of that Yankee knapsack. He'll make it back to the Division Field Hospital, where the doctor wants to amputate the foot. He refuses, and he actually will serve out the rest of the war, goes back to Texas and serves in a cavalry unit, but his left foot is largely fixed or frozen in position. He will spend the rest of his life hobbling on that wounded foot, injured in his passing the Vineyard house. The edge of the woods here is essentially the high water mark of of Robertson's attack and Benning on the other side of the road. Federals will come up. There'll be a brief counterattack into this field, which is itself thrown back, and Robertson's men will then consolidate in the woods here, just a little bit to the northeast of where we are right now. Benning will do so a little bit to the north, and that's where they will spend the night of the 19th to the early morning hours of September the 20th, and then be moved up to the north to become part of Longstreet's assault force on Sunday, September the 20th. The Texans have had hard fights on lots of battlefields. And here is another one in this action on September the 19th here at the Vineyard Farms. Anybody have any questions at this point?
Most of the residents, have they left the area?
Yes. Most of the residents, there have been Union troops at Lee and Gordon's Mill since September the 11th. Bragg's army had retreated down the LaFayette Road here on September the 7th, 8th, and 9th. There actually had been some skirmishing as those Union troops arrived on the 11th. And then many of these citizens had been living here in July of 1862 when the wagon train of Bragg's army in the move from Mississippi to Chattanooga came up the Lafayette Road from the south. And they had the experience of being in the presence of large bodies of young men supposedly organized as a military force. And what most civilians learned during the Civil War was you didn't want to be anywhere near an army, even if it's your own, and even if there is no threat of an immediate fight. And so these folks have refugeed. Lots of them into the hills of Missionary Ridge. Others have gone east. And in the overall region, lots of Southern sympathizers, particularly if they had a little bit of money and wherewithal, they relocate some distance, maybe even down to Atlanta or beyond, just to simply get away from what is obviously now going to be the scene of a conflict. The vineyards were only renters, one vineyard boy is in the Confederate Army. A vineyard daughter will marry one of the Texas soldiers of Robertson's brigade in early 1864 down in Atlanta. Tabler Vineyard, the patriarch of the family, joins the Union Army in 1864 and actually died in August of 1864 in a Union hospital over at Bridgeport, Alabama. So you've got a lot of variation to the story of the local residents. And after the war, Miss Vineyard does not return here. She lives somewhere in Catoosa County. I haven't been able to figure out exactly where in Catoosa County, unknown property. But then in in the early 1870s, she moves to Texas, where her daughter married that Texas soldier has his livings.
Jim, how densely populated was it along this road? Just the people whose named residences have a little round sign?
Right. That's pretty much what it is. So you've got the vineyards here, a Brock family right up here, then the Brothertons, then the Poes, then the Kellys, then the McDonalds, the first family north of the Battlefield Park in Fort Oglethorpe, about where the Save-A-Lot grocery store is, Park Place Restaurant. That family's name was Strange, literally S-T-R-A-N-G-E. And then you've got Cloud. I'll think of it in a minute. they have a boy killed here, and he's buried in the family cemetery right up here, just north of the.
Hargrave?
Sorry.
Hargrave?
Hargrave.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Hargrave. Hargrave family, then Hine. It's not heavily populated because the soil quality here is so poor. How much time did we spend on that trail walking on exposed limestone? There's just not a lot of soil here, and so the population density was pretty low.
You mentioned the school. Any churches along this road?
Well, up on McFarland Gap Road, where tour stop number 1 is today, just in the woods to the west of there, was Savannah Church. Now, it seems to be more a community meeting place where if the Methodist circuit rider was making this circuit, he would preach. If somebody else was making the ride through here, they would preach there. The church does not appear in the church records of the Presbyterian Church or the Methodist Church. The Baptist church records are actually pretty good, and even some of the associational records survive. And there's nothing in those which suggests that there was a formal congregation there that was a part of the Baptist association. So I think it was probably more a community meeting place, which occasionally hosted a pastor of one denomination or another. But both the Presbyterians and the Methodists who were using circuit riders, this is only listed as, or this area is listed for the Methodists as the Chattanooga Circuit. And they don't enumerate all the different places where the preacher assigned to the Chattanooga Circuit where he would preach. So there's unknowns about that church.
Have you heard of a Baptist church called Burning Bush Church?
Well,
Or is that a modern day church?
At least there is one now.
yeah. And that church does have some age or history to it, but I don't think it goes back to the Civil War. Peavine Baptist was the closest to the southwest. It's still an active church today. Texas, the 2nd Regiment from the left, says that we had advanced but a short distance. The 4th Texas, the right center regiment of the brigade, says after advancing about 200 yards. The 5th Texas says I advanced about 300 yards. Remember what I said about how Johnson was angling across the front of the line? You can actually see that by this increased distance towards the right. The advance was through a thick woods on the side hill, and just before we struck the flat, we've come down a slope, and notice the ground is flattening out. Some of our men were struck down by shells of the enemy, but we pressed forward. We met quite a number of men returning, command not known, some of Bushrod Johnson's men. And soon after, they will suddenly see the enemy. The enemy will make his appearance to my left. And the report came from the commander of the skirmishers that the enemy were advancing on our left flank. And this will necessitate a change of my front to suit the direction from which the enemy was advancing. It's even more of a turn now to the left. The regiment was immediately marched by the left flank to meet their advance. Colonel Manning, commanding the 3rd Arkansas, my left regiment, was ordered to change front with 2 companies to meet them, I believing at the moment that it was a small force sent to make a diversion threatening my flank. But these dispositions were completed. My line had passed the crest of the hill, and I discovered the enemy in heavy force on my left. And we found them posted in large numbers in a ravine covered by thick undergrowth. And they opened a heavy fire upon us. And at this point, we opened fire. A sharp fire commenced on the left of the brigade and extended down the line to our right. Up to this time, we had met this line. Our progress had not been impeded except by a line of skirmishers and a heavy fire of grape and canister. So now they have made contact, and they're angling even a little bit more to the southwest, angling off in that direction towards the sound of the guns. Robertson, now in contact, says, I sent a staff officer to inform General Law of it, and he sent me orders to change front and meet them. And this made it necessary for me to change my front forward on the left battalion, which was done promptly under a heavy fire. To do this, I had necessarily to detach my brigade from General Law's, and I sent a courier to inform him of the change. My line steadily advanced. The advance will continue, and soon they will get the order to charge. So now they are fully engaged with the Federals, more off to the left front, so going off in that direction. So, all right.
Is that Higgs?
It is Haig's brigade that they are largely up against. However, there are 2 regiments of Harker's brigade of Wood's division as well now in this fight. So this is Haig's second movement to the east of the Lafayette Road. He had moved east of the Lafayette Road, been driven back by Johnson. After Johnson goes off to the northwest, Haig reorganizes, goes back across the road again, and so this is the second contact for Haig, his second movement across the roads. All right. Eastern edge of the vineyard field. The trees that you see over here were not here at the time. We should be able to see the monuments in Vineyard Field from here. But those trees are grown up on a wet weather drainage today.